Karen's twisted smile widened as she tightened the lock around the bike, trapping it to the pole. "That'll teach him a lesson," she muttered under her breath. But little did she know, her small act of petty revenge was about to spiral out of control, turning the entire neighborhood against her in a shocking confrontation that would change everything. Kevin panted as he raced down the sidewalk, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. He was already 10 minutes late for his shift at the diner, and his boss was going to kill him. Rounding the corner, he spotted his nephew's bike locked to a pole up ahead. What the? Kevin broke into a sprint, his heart pounding. As he got closer, he recognized the distinctive pink and purple paint job. Someone had stolen his nephew's bike. Enraged, Kevin grabbed the lock and yanked at it furiously, but it wouldn't budge. That's when he noticed a piece of paper fluttering in the breeze, tucked under the seat. Kevin snatched it and read the scrawled message. "Learned your lesson yet, punk? Keep your brat's bike off my lawn." Rage boiled inside him. He knew exactly who was behind this, his nosy neighbor, Karen. That meddling old witch had been harassing his family for months, always complaining about the noise or the eyesore of a basketball hoop in their driveway. "Oh, you're gonna learn a lesson all right," Kevin growled, crumpling the note in his fist. He whirled around, scanning the street, and caught a glimpse of Karen's floral dress disappearing into her house. Without a second thought, Kevin sprinted up her driveway and pounded on the door. "Karen, open up, you crazy old bat. I know you took my nephew's bike." The door swung open, and there stood Karen, her eyes narrowed to slits. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she snapped. "Now get off my property before I call the police." "The hell you don't." Kevin shoved past her, barging into the house. "Where is it, Karen? Where's the bike?" Karen stumbled backward, her face reddening. "Get out of my house this instant, or I swear I'll—" "You'll what?" Kevin interrupted, his voice rising. "You'll lock up another innocent kid's bike. Well, guess what? That's not happening again." "Security," Karen shrieked, her voice echoing through the house. "Call the police. This maniac is trespassing." Kevin froze, his blood running cold as he heard the sound of footsteps thundering down the street. Whirling around, he saw a crowd of neighbors spilling out of their homes, some wielding garden tools, others shouting angrily. "There he is. Get him." Realizing he was vastly outnumbered, Kevin turned and bolted out the door, his heart pounding in his ears. He had to get away before the whole block caught up to him. As he raced down the sidewalk, he could hear the angry shouts and pounding footsteps closing in behind him. Karen's shrill voice pierced the air. "Don't let him get away." Kevin pumped his legs harder, desperate to escape the growing mob. This was not how his day was supposed to go. All he wanted was to get to work on time. Now he was running for his life, all because of some crazy old lady and her vendetta against his nephew's bike. Keeban's lungs burned as he sprinted down the sidewalk, the furious mob closing in behind him. He risked a glance over his shoulder and saw the crowd of angry neighbors surging forward, their shouts echoing through the quiet suburban streets. "There he goes. Don't let him get away." Karen's shrill voice rose above the din, her face twisted with rage. "Catch that vandal. He broke into my house." Kevin's mind raced as he desperately searched for a way to lose the pursuing horde. Up ahead, he spotted an alleyway cutting between two houses. Without hesitation, he veered off the sidewalk and darted into the narrow passage. The alley was cluttered with garbage cans and old lawn furniture, but Kevin navigated the obstacles with practiced ease, his smaller frame allowing him to slip through the tight spaces. He could hear the frustrated cries of the neighbors as they struggled to follow him through the alley. Emerging onto the next street, Kevin glanced around frantically, looking for anywhere to hide. His gaze landed on an open garage door a few houses down. Without a moment's pause, he sprinted toward it, praying the owners were home. "Hey, stop!" A voice bellowed behind him. Kevin risked another look over his shoulder and saw one of the neighbors, a burly man in a tank top, closing in fast. Summoning the last of his strength, Kevin pushed his aching legs harder, diving through the open garage just as the man's meaty hand reached for the back of his shirt. The garage was dim and cluttered, filled with boxes and old furniture. Kevin scurried behind a stack of tires, crouching low and holding his breath as the sound of pounding footsteps and angry shouts grew closer. "Where'd he go?" a woman's voice demanded. "I saw him come in here," the burly man replied. "Search everywhere." Kevin's heart pounded in his ears as the sounds of the mob echoed through the garage. He pressed himself deeper into the shadows, praying they wouldn't find him. If they did, he had no doubt they would tear him apart. The minutes ticked by like hours as the neighbors frantically calmed the garage, their voices growing more and more frustrated. Just when Kevin thought he might be discovered, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway outside made the searchers pause. "That's my husband's car," the woman exclaimed. "He's back from work. Quick, let's get him to help us." The sound of footsteps retreated, and Kevin let out a shaky breath, sagging with relief. For now, he was safe. But he knew it was only a matter of time before the mob picked up his trail again. He had to find a way out of this mess before they caught him. Kevin crouched in the shadows of the cluttered garage, his heart pounding in his ears. The angry mob outside had paused their search, but he knew it was only a matter of time before they resumed their hunt. Carefully, he peered around the stack of tires, watching as the neighbors rushed to flag down the car pulling into the driveway. A tall, burly man stepped out, his face set in a stern expression as the crowd surrounded him, gesticulating wildly and shouting. Kevin strained to hear their conversation, but the words were muffled. Suddenly, the man's gaze snapped toward the garage, and Kevin ducked back behind the tires, his breath catching in his throat. Had he been spotted? Kevin waited, every muscle tense, bracing himself for the moment the garage door would burst open and the mob would descend upon him. But the seconds ticked by, and no one came. Cautiously, he peeked out again, just in time to see the man nod and start striding toward the garage. Kevin's heart raced as the footsteps drew closer, the sound of the man's heavy boots echoing in the confined space. "Hello?" a deep voice called out. "Is someone in here?" Kevin pressed himself deeper into the shadows, willing himself to disappear. The footsteps approached, and suddenly, a figure loomed over him, silhouetted against the light from the open garage door. "There you are," the man said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. "Come on out, son. You're safe now." Realizing he had no choice, Kevin slowly stood up, his legs shaking. The man's face came into focus, and Kevin recognized him as his next-door neighbor, Mr. Johnson, a retired police officer. "What's going on out there?" Mr. Johnson asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Kevin hesitated, unsure if he could trust the older man. But seeing the genuine worry in his eyes, Kevin decided to take a chance. "My neighbor, Karen, she locked my nephew's bike to a pole," he explained, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I went to get it back, and now the whole block is after me." Mr. Johnson's expression darkened, and he let out a heavy sigh. "Karen? Huh. I should have known." He placed a reassuring hand on Kevin's shoulder. "Don't worry, son. You're safe with me. Let's get you out of here and sort this mess out." Hope flared in Kevin's chest as he followed Mr. Johnson toward the back of the garage. Maybe, just maybe, he had a chance to get out of this without facing the wrath of the entire neighborhood. Kevin trailed behind Mr. Johnson as the older man led him through the cluttered garage and out a side door. The sound of the angry mob echoed from the front of the house, but here, in the relative calm of the backyard, it felt like they were in a different world entirely. "Come on, let's get you somewhere safe," Mr. Johnson said, ushering Kevin towards a small shed at the far end of the yard. As they hurried across the grass, Kevin couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Mr. Johnson could help him find a way out of this mess. Once inside the shed, Mr. Johnson closed the door, muffling the distant shouts from the front of the house. "All right, son, tell me exactly what happened," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. Kevin quickly recounted the events, from finding his nephew's bike locked to the pole to the terrifying moment when the entire neighborhood had turned against him. "That Karen," Mr. Johnson muttered, shaking his head. "I should have known she was behind this. She's been causing trouble in this neighborhood for years." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "You say you tried to get the bike back, but she locked it up?" Kevin nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I was already late for work, and I lost my temper. I went to her house to confront her, and that's when the whole block came after me." Mr. Johnson let out a heavy sigh. "I see. Well, I can't say I blame you for losing your cool, but you shouldn't have barged into Karen's house like that. Even if she was in the wrong, that was still trespassing." Kevin's shoulders slumped. I know. I was so angry, and I wasn't thinking straight. Now I'm in even bigger trouble." "Don't worry, son," Mr. Johnson said, placing a reassuring hand on Kevin's shoulder. "I'll make sure you get out of this. But we'll need to do it smart, not just charge in like you did before." Kevin felt a surge of gratitude towards the older man. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I don't know what I'd do without your help." Mr. Johnson chuckled. "Don't worry about it. I may be retired, but I've still got a few tricks up my sleeve. Now, let's figure out how to get your nephew's bike back and clear your name." As they began to discuss a plan, Kevin felt a sense of relief wash over him. With Mr. Johnson's help, maybe he could still find a way to make things right and avoid the wrath of the entire neighborhood. Kevin sat in the dimly lit shed, his mind racing as Mr. Johnson laid out his plan. The older man's calm, steady demeanor was a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted just minutes ago on the quiet suburban street. "All right, here's what we're going to do," Mr. Johnson said, his voice low and measured. "First, I'll need to go out there and smooth things over with the neighbors. Convince them to call off the search and let me handle this." Kevin felt a twinge of anxiety. What if they don't listen to you? What if they come barging in here? Mr. Johnson gave him a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, son. I know how to handle a bunch of riled-up busybodies. They may be angry, but they know better than to cross me." Leaning in, he placed a hand on Kevin's shoulder. "While I'm out there, I need you to stay put. Don't make a sound, and don't try to sneak out, no matter what you hear. Understand?" Kevin nodded, his throat dry. "Okay, I'll stay put. But what about the bike? How are we going to get it back?" "That's the tricky part," Mr. Johnson admitted. "Karen's got it locked up tight, and she's not going to just hand it over, especially after you burst into her house." He paused, his brow furrowing in thought. "But I think I've got an idea. Just leave that to me." With a firm nod, Mr. Johnson stood and made his way to the shed door. "Remember, stay hidden. I'll be back as soon as I can." As the door creaked open, the distant sounds of the angry mob flooded in, making Kevin flinch. Then, just as quickly, the door closed, and he was left in eerie silence, alone with his racing thoughts. Kevin's fingers drummed nervously on his thigh as he strained to hear any sign of what was happening outside. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slow, and he found himself holding his breath whenever a new sound reached his ears. Suddenly, a loud commotion erupted, followed by the sound of raised voices. Kevin's heart leaped into his throat, and he had to fight the urge to peek out the window. What if the neighbors had discovered his hiding place? The voices grew louder, but after a few tense moments, they began to subside. Then the sound of footsteps approached the shed, and Kevin braced himself, ready to fight if he had to. But the door swung open, and there stood Mr. Johnson, a triumphant grin on his face. "Come on, son," he said. "It's time to get your nephew's bike back." Kevin followed Mr. Johnson out of the shed, his heart pounding with a mix of trepidation and hope. The older man's confident stride and the determined glint in his eye told Kevin that he had a plan, but he couldn't help but worry about what they might be walking into. As they approached the front of the house, the sounds of the angry mob had faded to a tense silence. Kevin peered around the corner, half expecting to see the neighbors still prowling the street, but to his surprise, the block was eerily quiet. "Where is everyone?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Johnson chuckled. "Don't worry, I took care of it." Convinced the whole bunch to cool their heels for a while. Kevin stared at him, baffled. "How did you?" "I've got my ways," Mr. Johnson interrupted, winking. "Now, let's go get your nephew's bike back." The two men strode down the street, the only sound the crunch of their footsteps on the pavement. As they approached the pole where the bike had been locked, Kevin felt a surge of both relief and trepidation. The bike was still there, but would Karen be lurking nearby, ready to pounce? Mr. Johnson stepped up to the lock, examining it closely. Looks like a pretty heavy-duty one, but I think I can handle it." Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small toolkit and began to work on the lock. Kevin watched, his breath caught in his throat, as the older man skillfully manipulated the device. After a few tense minutes, there was a satisfying click, and the lock fell open. Mr. Johnson grinned, tossing it aside. "There we go. Good as new." Kevin stared at him, awestruck. "How did you?" "I told you. I've got my ways," Mr. Johnson said, chuckling. "Now let's get this bike back to your nephew before Karen realizes what's happened." As they began to wheel the bike away, a movement in the corner of Kevin's eye made him freeze. There, in the window of Karen's house, he caught a glimpse of the old woman's floral dress and a flash of pure rage on her face. "She knows," Kevin whispered, his heart sinking. "Then we'd best get moving," Mr. Johnson replied, his tone serious. "I don't think we want to be here when she comes charging out." Without another word, the two men hurried down the street, the bike's wheels clattering over the pavement. Kevin couldn't help but glance back, half expecting to see Karen burst from her house, a mob of angry neighbors in tow. But the street remained eerily quiet, save for the sound of their retreat. Kevin let out a shaky breath, relief and adrenaline coursing through him. They had outsmarted the old witch this time, but he had a feeling this wouldn't be the last he heard from her. Kevin pedaled furiously, the bike's wheels spinning beneath him as he raced down the quiet suburban street. Next to him, Mr. Johnson kept pace, his face set in a determined expression. "Hang on, we're almost there," the older man called out, his voice barely audible over the whir of the bike. Kevin's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: relief at having retrieved his nephew's bike, fear of retribution from the enraged Karen, and a growing sense of unease about the entire situation. As they turned the corner onto his street, Kevin spotted his small nephew, Timmy, sitting on the front steps, his face etched with worry. "Timmy," Kevin shouted, bringing the bike to a skidding halt. "Are you okay?" The young boy's face lit up with a huge grin. "Kevin, you got my bike back." He rushed over, throwing his arms around Kevin's waist. Kevin hugged him tightly, a wave of relief washing over him. "I'm so sorry, Timmy. I promise, I'm never going to let that crazy old lady mess with you again." Mr. Johnson stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I think it's best if we get that bike inside, son. Who knows when Karen might try something again." Timmy's eyes went wide. "Karen did this? Oh no, I'm so sorry." Kevin ruffled the boy's hair. "Don't worry, Timmy. Mr. Johnson and I took care of it. Now let's get this thing locked up somewhere safe." As they wheeled the bike into the garage, Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Karen had proven herself to be a vindictive and determined adversary, and he had a sinking suspicion that she wouldn't let this go easily. "Thanks for your help, Mr. Johnson," he said, his voice tinged with worry. "I don't know what I would have done without you." The older man clapped a hand on Kevin's shoulder. "Don't mention it, son. I'm just glad we were able to get the bike back without any more trouble. He paused, his brow furrowing. But I have a feeling this isn't the last we've heard from that old witch. You should keep your eyes peeled, and don't hesitate to call me if you need anything. Kevin nodded, his stomach churning with dread. I will. And thanks again for everything. As Mr. Johnson made his way back home, Kevin turned to Timmy, mustering a reassuring smile. All right, kiddo, let's get this bike put away. And then we're going to have a talk about being more careful with your stuff. Okay. Timmy nodded solemnly, the weight of the afternoon's events evident in his young eyes. Kevin sighed, ushering the boy into the garage. He had a feeling that the crisis with Karen was far from over, and he needed to be ready for whatever she had in store. The days that followed were tense and uneasy for Kevin and his family. With Karen's bike firmly locked away in the garage, they waited anxiously for the other shoe to drop, fully expecting the vindictive old woman to strike back at any moment. But to their surprise, the neighborhood remained eerily quiet. Kevin half expected to see Karen lurking around every corner, glaring at him with her beady eyes, but she seemed to have vanished completely. Do you think she finally realized she's beaten? Timmy asked one evening as they sat on the porch enjoying the cool summer breeze. Kevin shook his head, a frown creasing his brow. I doubt it, Timmy. That woman is as stubborn as a mule. She's probably just biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to get her revenge. Timmy's face fell, and Kevin quickly ruffled the boy's hair. But don't worry, kid. Mr. Johnson and I will be ready for her. We won't let her pull anything else on this family, I promise. Just then, the sound of a car engine rumbling down the street caught their attention. Kevin felt his muscles tense as he recognized the familiar sight of Karen's old sedan rounding the corner. Speak of the devil, he muttered, watching as the car pulled into the driveway across the street. To his surprise, however, Karen didn't immediately emerge, fuming and ready for a confrontation. Instead, the driver's side door opened, and a young woman stepped out, her arms laden with grocery bags. Who's that? Timmy asked, squinting in the fading light. I have no idea, Kevin replied, his brow furrowed in confusion. Moments later, the front door of Karen's house swung open, and the old woman herself hobbled out, using a cane for support. She greeted the younger woman with a warm embrace, a rare sight for the usually gruff and standoffish neighbor. Well, I'll be darned, Kevin murmured, watching the scene with a mix of surprise and suspicion. Looks like Karen's got a visitor. As the two women disappeared into the house, an idea began to form in Kevin's mind. Perhaps this was the perfect opportunity to make amends, or at the very least, a chance to gain some insight into Karen's sudden change in demeanor. Come on, Timmy, he said, standing up from the porch. I think it's time we pay our neighbor a visit. Crossing the street, Kevin approached the front door, his heart pounding. He raised his hand and knocked firmly, bracing himself for whatever might come next. After a few moments, the door swung open, and there stood Karen, her expression unreadable. What do you want? She snapped, her voice lacking its usual venom. Kevin took a deep breath. Karen, I want to apologize for what happened the other day. I shouldn't have barged into your house like that, and I'm sorry for the trouble I caused. To his surprise, Karen's eyes widened slightly, and the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease. Well, I suppose I shouldn't have locked up the boy's bike in the first place, she admitted, her voice almost hesitant. The sound of footsteps behind her drew both their attention, and the younger woman from earlier appeared, a curious expression on her face. Grandma, who's this? She asked, her gaze shifting between Karen and Kevin. Karen cleared her throat, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. This is my neighbor, Kevin, the one I was telling you about. The young woman's eyes widened, and she stepped forward, extending her hand. It's nice to meet you, Kevin. I'm Karen's granddaughter, Amanda. I've been staying with her for the summer, and she's been telling me all about the, little incidents between you two. Kevin shook her hand, a small, sheepish smile creeping across his face. It's good to meet you two. I hope Karen hasn't been painting me in too bad a light. Amanda laughed, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Oh, don't worry. She's been keeping me entertained with all the stories. But I have to say, I'm glad you two seem to be making amends. Karen cleared her throat again, her expression softening. Yes, well, I suppose we should put this whole incident behind us. For the sake of the neighborhood, if nothing else. Kevin nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders. I'd like that, Karen. And, if there's anything I can do to make it up to you, just let me know. The old woman waved a hand dismissively, a hint of a smile on her face. Oh, don't worry about it, boy. Just keep that nephew of yours in line, and we'll call it even. With that, the two neighbors parted ways, a newfound understanding settling between them. As Kevin and Timmy returned to their own home, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and cautious optimism. Maybe, just maybe, the long-standing feud with Karen was finally coming to an end.